Remnant 2 is shaping up to be a game that I am really looking forward to. It's being billed as a third-person action RPG with Souls-like influence, and if you played the first one, you're probably really looking forward to the second. And my thoughts on the first game when I tried it was that I saw the potential. I could see why people liked it, but it just didn't hook me. It was a little too clunky. It felt a little bit dated. I wanted something to feel a little bit smoother, have a little bit more fluidity. And I think that's where Remnant 2, the gameplay that I've seen, has really caught my attention. Also, there is procedural generation. I'm going to explain how that works in a moment. We've got some good info just about what that is, and what they actually called it something in the first game that I think is rather interesting, and what that might do to the second game. We also have information about stats and how there's a bigger focus on stats and numbers in Remnant 2. And lastly, you can play the game early, as well as we're going to look at why is everybody constantly asking this question, will it be on Game Pass? Make sure if you like these videos to subscribe. So my thoughts on the new game is that it looks like it's sort of capturing what I wanted from the first game, sort of the high action shooting, but also kind of melee intensity, that third person over the shoulder, without it feeling sort of clunky. I think third person games have struggled with this for a while. You sort of make the character feel stiff in their movements, stiff in their animations, and I'm just not seeing that in the gameplay for Remnant 2, and I really am hoping that this game can deliver, because you can play with other people. I believe they're looking at trying to do crossplay. I don't know if that has been answered yet, but as far as the gameplay loop goes, I really think the procedural generation could potentially help it. Now, some people are against procedural generation. They see it as sort of a lack of handcraftedness. They don't think it's going to be particularly enjoyable. And this one might rub some people the wrong way. I am going to take a look at the details in a second, but mainly what I want to say is procedural generation is, I think, a good way to keep a game lively, to keep a game fresh. It can, I think, get into bland or uninspired territory where you can sense just sort of the set pieces being put together. You know that this is sort of familiar, even though it's new. It doesn't really feel new, if that makes sense. But I do think we're going to see procedural generation start to get harnessed in better ways to give you that almost endless experience when they start to harness this for world building, for open world games or MMOs. I think that'll truly be a unique time for gaming if it can be done in a way where it feels emergent and real, or maybe more dynamic and not so predictable. Procedural generation used in Diablo 3 Rifts, for example, you do start to sort of know and predict what things are going to look and feel like, even though it is different every time. I do think it's harder for games that are isometric to leverage this. We know that Helldivers did that in their first game, and we're questioning whether or not that's going to show up in Helldivers 2. I think it's more impactful in a third-person game to use procedural generation to sort of make the set pieces, the worlds, the enemies, and all of those things change. So how exactly is this going to work in Remnant 2? Well, in Remnant from the Ashes, apparently that's the first game, the dungeons and the mini-bosses were procedurally generated, so no two players could encounter the same boss in the same dungeon. In Remnant 2, not only dungeons and bosses can differ, but also storylines. And this is the thing that I think might rub people the wrong way. They might be like, what? I don't want the story to be random or to change. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Well, let's read on. When players venture into a new area in the game, they will experience a random storyline that could be different from what other players experience when they venture into that location. Everything changes, including the overarching narrative, NPCs, world bosses, and more. Now, I'm assuming there's going to only be a certain number of possibilities of story that are available in a given area, right? Like, it's not like there's going to be this endless amount. Now, I'm assuming, long term, we did a series on AI and machine learning and what it'll do to gaming. There will probably be a time where procedural generation and machine learning could piece together completely fresh and new storylines that are literally made from scratch, right? You would set a certain number of parameters, personality traits, dialogue options, and you could put that into very, very high quantity counts. In this game, I don't think they're doing that, right? I don't think so. And it says here at the end, and we're pulling this from Jinx.tv. It says, even if two players end up in the same world and encounter similar storylines and dungeons, chances are that the events and enemies they face within these dungeons would be different. The dungeon layout would change as well. There's value here, I would think, in replayability, replay value, but I also think we need to look at what they called this in the first game, because I think it'll give you a picture into what they're going for. I don't think this is meant to feel like an ever-changing world. It's meant to be an extension of your experience so that it can be changed and updated. So the GameCrater.com was asking the question if New Game Plus was going to be in Remnant 2. Now, they're basically saying it's guaranteed to feature it, but then they said, fortunately, fans of the feature can breathe a sigh of relief. While it's not your traditional New Game Plus mode, the reroll mechanic is still available, so they're referring to this as rerolling. The gameplay loop revolves around rerolling your campaign and adventure modes in order to earn better equipment, all while keeping your stuff. Despite the term being similar to those gacha games, it's completely different. This feature was present in the launch of Remnant from the Ashes and is guaranteed to be present in Remnant 2. The re-rolling mechanic is pivotal to the game and essentially allows each run to offer new bosses, enemies, and map layouts. So when you look at it in that way, you're re-rolling, you're resetting, you're changing, I think, what the world in that will be like. So this isn't necessarily meant to give you the impression that, well, this is a whole new fresh world or a whole new fresh arching story. It's mainly you sort of rolling the dice again. This kind of harkens back to how more traditional tabletop RPGs sort of are experienced. Somebody very kind sent me and my kiddos this game called Descent. It's a board game that you use an iPad with, and it has you building the set pieces and the worlds as you're moving through. So it's kind of like video game meets board game. My kids absolutely love it. It takes a while to set up and get going, so sometimes I'm like, we don't have time tonight, but they absolutely love it. And the idea of rolling a whole new area, I sort of get that picture in my mind of this game Descent playing with my kiddos. It's like, okay, well, if I re-roll the area, there's a new chance of different enemies, different layouts, different bosses, but also different loot. And that's really tied to something that is going to be different in this game, and it was touched on by an article by The Gamer. There's going to be a lot more stats in this. Their article was that it was going to have numbies. That's what he refers to. Like all these numbers, right? I love all these numbies. Now, some people might not like this change because if you're not a big stat cruncher, if you're like me, I generally don't like doing this. I just sort of chase the green arrows, if I'm playing Diablo or something. I'm just chasing the green arrows. I don't want to look at numbers and have to think through, okay, is this, additive? Is this multiplicative? How's this going to, end up with damage over time? Or, that's the kind of stuff that I generally don't like doing. Now, sometimes if it's accessible and I know and can see and measure the impact, then I'm kind of good. I'm more interested in tracking those stats. So let's take a look at what The Gamer has to say. Remnant 2 is going full RPG when it comes to loot. Armor pieces no longer have any set bonuses. Instead, every piece has a unique stat distribution, and you're meant to mix and match pieces and trade them out when you get more powerful gear. Your accessory slots have been expanded from 3 to 6, which create a lot more potential for creative builds, and they've also added 3 additional slots to your Dragon Heart, now called the Relic, where you can equip more stat enhancers. All of those numbies, there you go, numbies, on top of the new class exclusive perks and skills, are designed to give players a lot more latitude in how they customize and build up their characters. There might be people that don't like this. You may have a lot more of a simpler attitude about these games. Generally, my take on stats in a game like this is as long as surface level choices can be made and you feel empowered and you feel rewarded, then I'm totally fine. That's typically how I want games like this to be, is simplicity on the surface and complexity down below. Like if somebody really wants to dig down deep into the system and they want to min-max and they want to get crazy damage with some weird combination that maybe you didn't think of because you're just sort of saying, hey, this does more damage, or hey, this armor protects me more, I think having those two can work, and it doesn't sound like this is going to be too daunting. It sounds like you're going to roughly have, 6 pieces of gear, but then you're going to have slots on this relic that's going to enable you to enhance certain stats. Now, going up from 3 pieces of gear to 6, that really increases the number of potential permutations and combinations that you can come up with, which can give people some paralysis. It's like, I don't know what I want to use, I don't know what all these systems mean, so you may end up feeling a little stuck. That's okay. I think that's just something that you have to kind of learn to eat around. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I would say the more options you give players, the more slots, the more combinations they can come up with, the more freedom you can have. And remember, all of this is in an environment where you can re-roll and have those randomly generated, procedurally generated encounters to get better gear, to test it out, to fight against these different bosses and these different dungeons. So I think they've got something really special here, okay? This is going to be a shorter video for me. I typically go a little bit longer, but I really just wanted to focus on the fact that this sounds like a very unique take on this style of game, from the procedural generation to the stats. But I do want to say a couple things at the end here. You can play early, and we do have an article here from the Nerd Stash that has the information for us. Early access for Remnant 2 is only available to people who pre-ordered the Ultimate Edition. Remnant 2 Early Access will be available to play 3 days before the official launch date. The official release date for Remnant 2 is the 25th, meaning you can expect to download early access version of the game on July 21st or early July 22, depending on where you live. So if you want to play 3 days early, you could be playing on the 22nd. Now, I'm back in town, right? I'm back in town on the 24th. So I will probably try to do a gameplay session of this on that Monday. We'll do a talk show, and then we'll check it out. I do like checking out games like this with you guys, and this is definitely one I'm wanting to take a peek at. Now, there was a question about whether or not this game would be on Game Pass, and there is no answer yet to that question. I find that a little frustrating that every single time a game comes out, that question is the number one question from a certain portion of the gaming audience. If you think this game looks dope, if you think it looks like fun, then buy it. If you're not sure, then watch streamers play it, watch YouTube reviewers. You can make an informed decision. But completely passing on games simply because they don't jump on Game Pass, I think is a significant mistake, especially when one like this hits that looks creative. It looks like they're really trying to honor player time and investment and give you more choices. They're trying to give you a lot of replayability. I just really hope that is it on Game Pass question starts to not be so prevalent. I'm probably hoping against all odds here. I get it. It's great value. You buy into a subscription funnel, and then you just get to kind of play the games that are there, and you don't really have to think about buying games. I know gaming can be an expensive hobby. I know times are tough. That's a great way to play games and not have to worry about, am I going to waste my precious $60 or $70 on this game, especially when you have some that have come out. Like, I've been incredibly disappointed with Jedi Survivor. I haven't gone back to it. I bring it up in almost every video when price and value comes up, because that's a game where I really feel like I didn't get my value, and obviously Game Pass protects you from those sorts of things. But I also think something that's really good for the industry is buying and supporting the games that really knock it out of the park. So Remnant 2 can, be played on the 25th. If you did the Ultimate Edition, you can play it as early as the 22nd. So check out my channel. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss when we check out the gameplay and we do dive in. So that way you can see and make a decision whether or not you want to play. Maybe you can play with me if you're around on the launch date, if you're one of the people that like to jump in and help me out with these games. Now, again, like I said, I am out of town, so these premieres have been hitting in the morning. This is a little on the shorter end. You're like, oh no, it's not a big lengthy monologue. There wasn't as much that I could do this far in advance to give you those lengthy shows. But we'll be back up and running on the 24th, so make sure you're subscribed, make sure you're using that bell button so you don't miss the content. You can hit that join button and jump in the members-only Discord. That's a great way to stay in touch with me. I might even be posting some pictures in there while I'm on my trip. As always, though, on this video, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video.